Hey everybody, it's Rachel. Welcome back to the channel. So there is this old Turkish proverb that says, "The forest was shrinking, but the trees kept voting for the axe, for the axe was clever and convinced the trees that because its handle was made of wood, he was one of them." Now, that one hits a little like a double espresso. It's simple, sharp, and just unsettling enough to make you pause mid-sip. Because we all know that feeling, watching something fall apart while the very people it's hurting keep cheering it on. The axe never forces its way in. It smiles, introduces itself, and says, "Don't worry, I'm just like you. I'm here to help." And the forest, wanting to believe, nods. "Well, of course you are. Look at that handle. Solid oak, just like me." But the blade, the part that cuts, that's steel, cold, efficient, detached from the roots and the rain that gave the forest life. That's what this proverb is about. How deception wears the disguise of familiarity. How the things or the people that hurt us most rarely come shouting. They come smiling. They come sounding relatable. They come claiming kinship. And in that sense, this proverb isn't ancient at all. It's timeless, maybe even prophetic. Because look around, the forest is shrinking again. And if you caught my last video about unlearning, this ties right in. Sometimes what we need to unlearn isn't just habits or beliefs. It's the comfort of letting others do the thinking for us. The axe feels familiar. It says the right things, so we stop questioning. But that's exactly how the forest disappears. Not all at once, but little by little, while everybody insists it's fine. The trees, meaning us, have a tendency to forget what we're made of. And what are we made of? Well, the same stuff that's kept the forest standing for centuries. Strength, connection, patience, and quiet endurance. We bend in storms, but we don't break. We hold up whole ecosystems without even realizing it. Every tree, no matter how small, feeds the air, shelters the ground, and steadies the wind. That is who we are, and that is what we keep forgetting. But we crave belonging, so when someone says the right words, looks the part, or tells us what we want to hear, we lower our guard. We start thinking, they understand me, they get it. But here's the problem. When you mistake looking alike for being alike, you hand over your roots to an axe that is just waiting to swing. In psychology, they call that identity bias or tribal thinking. In plain language, it's the human need to belong, even when belonging costs us our better judgment. We would rather feel safe in the group than right on our own. That is how clever axes rise. They don't conquer by power, they conquer by familiarity. They don't say, "I'm better than you." They say, "I get you. I know exactly what you need and how to get it." And it works because we're tired, we're overloaded, and being told that someone else will take care of it, that they think like us, feels easier than thinking critically about whether that's true. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Okay, Rachel, this sounds a little political. And you'd be right. But it's not only political, it's human. Still, we can't pretend it doesn't fit today's climate. Because when you look at some of our leadership, people who live in penthouses or dine with billionaires and wouldn't recognize a grocery store self-checkout if it bit them in the ass, somehow convincing working families that they're just folks, you can practically hear the axe whispering. That handle is made of wood after all, the language, the slogans, the photo ops in ball caps and rolled up sleeves. It's marketing genius, really. The axe never says, "I'm nothing like you." It says, "I get it. I'm fighting for you." Meanwhile, the forest keeps shrinking. And I don't say that to judge anyone who believed the axe. It's not stupidity. It's survival instincts. It's what humans have always done. Look for leaders who sound like us, because we assume that they will protect what we value. But history, philosophy, and honestly, common sense all remind us people can speak your language and still steal your lumber. The axe doesn't really work for the forest. It works for itself, for its sharpness, its shine, its reach. Every swing keeps its own edge gleaming. The forest might believe it's part of the plan, but it's really just the resource. The axe's purpose isn't growth, it's gain, power, profit, survival of the blade. Plato warned us about this 2,400 years ago in his allegory of the cave. He described people chained inside a dark cave, watching shadows flicker on the wall and calling them truth. But the shadows were just reflections that were manipulated by the ones holding the torches. Sound a little familiar? We live surrounded by screens and slogans, and we're told that the shadows are reality. The algorithm says, here's what's true. The media says, here's what to fear. And we nod because everyone around us is nodding too. Plato said that stepping outside the cave into the light of truth hurts your eyes at first. It's disorienting, but that is the cost of waking up. And maybe that's why so many trees stay comfortable in the forest, even when the forest is disappearing, because seeing clearly requires effort, and effort takes courage. The Stoics talked about that courage, the moral independence to think for yourself, even when the crowd is clapping for the axe. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane." That's actually one of my favorite lines because it's a warning and a dare. It takes guts to say, hold on, maybe this handle doesn't belong to the forest. It's not comfortable to question what everybody else seems so sure of, but thinking critically can be lonely work. You won't get applause for it. You might even get called stupid or crazy for it. But, as Marcus pointed out, maybe sanity isn't in numbers. Maybe it's in awareness. Maybe it's being the tree that quietly takes a look around and realizes that the sound it's been cheering isn't applause. It's chopping. We forget that thinking differently does not make you disloyal. It makes you conscious. But that's hard, isn't it? Because for a lot of us, identity is wrapped up in habit. I have always supported the axe, or my family's always trusted that one. And after a while, it stops being about what the axe is actually doing. It's just what we've always done. Once that loyalty becomes who you are, questioning it feels like a betrayal, even when your values have changed. That is how people end up defending the axe while it's chopping. It's not that they don't see what's happening. It's that they can't imagine stepping away from the one they have always stood beside. But this isn't new. That's why it's an ancient proverb. That is why the philosophers kept warning about it, because this pattern has been repeating since the first forest decided to side with an axe. The only way past it has always been the same: critical thinking. But most people don't want to do that. It's easier to let someone else say, this is the way, than to take the time to ask, is it really? Carl Jung would say this is projection. We project our ideals onto people who reflect back the parts of ourselves we want to believe in. Strength, sincerity, goodness, decency. But it's not just our best parts we project. We also project our fears, our insecurities, our anger, the parts of ourselves that we don't want to face. And that is where things get dangerous. Because when somebody comes along and mirrors our fears back to us, wrapping them in confidence and certainty, it feels like truth. It feels like safety. So we stop noticing the manipulation underneath it. We tell ourselves, they see what I see. They feel what I feel. And suddenly, our brains start filtering out evidence that they're not actually on our side. They're just really good at reflecting what unsettles us. It's emotional camouflage. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's what happens when forests keep voting for axes. Hi, baby. It's not fate, it's psychology. And you can see it everywhere, in politics, in corporations, in social movements, even in relationships. In business, it's the company that calls its employees family right before laying them off to boost shareholder profits or refusing to pay them a livable wage. In activism, it's the influencer who turns empathy into a brand, measuring compassion by clicks. In personal life, it's the friend who keeps saying, "I'm just like you," right before taking advantage of your trust again. Lao Tzu had something to say about this too. He wrote, "He who controls others may be powerful, but he who has mastered himself is mightier still." The axe thrives on control. The wise person thrives on awareness. Control is noisy. It sells fear, outrage, and identity. Awareness is quiet. It observes, it questions, and it responds with discernment. That is why critical thinking is such a threat to manipulation. It's calm. It doesn't bite on the first headline or a rally cry. It says, interesting. Let me check the source. That is not cynicism. That is composure. And yet, in our culture, we confuse the two. We think questioning means that you have given up hope. But questioning is actually how hope survives. It's how forests regrow. Because learning to see clearly is what lets you stay kind without being naive. Okay, let's talk about critical thinking for a second, because people love to throw that phrase around like it's a personality trait. It's not. It's a practice. Critical thinking doesn't mean distrusting everything. It means staying curious, even when something feels comfortable to believe. It means asking, what's the evidence? Who benefits if I believe this? And what are the consequences if I'm wrong? It's not about being smarter than everybody else. It's about being slower to react, faster to verify, and humble enough to admit when the axe has fooled you before. And trust me, we have all been fooled. If you're human, you have believed an axe. Maybe it's in politics or love, at work or online. Somebody said what you wanted to hear and you believed it because it felt familiar, comforting, right. That is not weakness, that's humanity. But the danger isn't in being fooled once, it's in refusing to learn the pattern. You can see the pattern right now in the modern forest. The leaders who say, "We're in this together," while living in mansions so removed that they might as well orbit the moon. Some of the billionaires who tell you that they too came from humble roots, forgetting to mention that their struggles involve choosing between boarding schools. The voices who insist they understand the pain of the working class, all while signing tax breaks for themselves with pens that are made of gold. The axe does not have to swing fast. It just needs patience, a little spin, a few slogans. Sometimes it doesn't even bother saying, "I'm one of you." It just says, "I'm the only one who can fix this. I know exactly what you need. I know what you want. I'm good at this. Trust me." And the trees, worn down by storms and droughts, start to believe it, because it's comforting to think someone else knows the way out. But the truth is, the axe isn't saving the forest. It's just really good at looking confident while it swings. That is the reality of every age. The wolves stopped wearing sheep's clothing a long time ago. They realized it's a lot easier to wear the shepherd's robe. You know, sometimes I think we underestimate how badly people want to believe. It's comforting to believe that somebody strong is in charge, somebody who gets it, somebody who will fight the monsters for us. But philosophy, especially Stoicism and Buddhism, keep whispering the same truth. There are no saviors coming. The work is ours. The peace, the protection, it has to grow from within the forest. You cannot outsource wisdom. When the Buddha said, "Do not believe anything simply because you have heard it," he wasn't being cynical. He was inviting people to test ideas against reality, their own lived truth. That is all critical thinking is, testing before trusting. If someone tells you they're one of you or that only they can save you, Ask yourself, do their choices match their words? Do their actions build the forest or strip it bare? That is discernment, and it's not wrong to question people in power. It's necessary, because truth without verification isn't virtue, it's vulnerability. Now, I don't think the moral here is to hate the axe. Anger can be clarifying for a while, but it burns energy fast. And honestly, some of the trees didn't cheer the axe because they were evil or stupid. They did it because they were desperate. They wanted to believe in something. When people feel unseen or forgotten, they will cling to any voice that finally acknowledges them. That is how manipulation works. It feeds on pain. The axe studies the forest before it ever swings. It learns which trees feel left out, which ones feel overshadowed, which ones resent the taller oaks. And then it whispers, "I'll make things fair again." That is why critical thinking has to come with empathy. It's not about sneering at all the ones who fell for the axe. It's about understanding why they did. The antidote to deception is not ridicule. It's education, compassion, and awareness. So, what do we do when we realize the forest is shrinking? We plant truth. We nurture awareness. We stop clapping for the sound of chopping. We stop mistaking volume for wisdom. We remember that humility and curiosity are stronger than outrage and slogans. Critical thinking is the opposite of blind loyalty. It says, "I'll support you if you're right, not just because you're loud or familiar or wearing the right color handle." It says, "Show me your results, not your rally." Or, as Mark Twain put it, loyalty to country always, loyalty to government when it deserves it. That's not rebellion, it's responsibility, because the health of the forest depends on the tree's ability to think, to question, to learn, to care more about truth than tribe. Every scroll, every headline, every conversation, pause, ask, is this real? Who benefits? Does this align with my values or just my emotions right now? That one pause just might save a tree. Philosophy gives us the roadmap for this kind of clarity. Plato says, "Step out of the cave and see with your own eyes." Marcus says, "Stay sane even when the crowd isn't." Lao Tzu says, "Master yourself before you try to control others." Jung says, "Make the unconscious conscious." And the Buddha says, "Test everything, believe nothing blindly." Put together, they all say the same thing. Awareness is freedom. When you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. When you think for yourself, you become uncuttable. Maybe that's what resilience really is. Not pretending everything's fine or ignoring how absurd the world feels right now, but refusing to let deception make you bitter or blind. You can still love the forest and call out the axe. You can still believe in people while being smart enough to question their motives. And you can still find peace, even when the world feels like it's been running a nonstop liquidation sale on common sense. So maybe the next time you hear someone claiming to be one of us or insisting they're the only ones who can fix it, pause before you hand them the run of the forest. Ask yourself, do they actually care about the forest or just what it can give them? Do they help things grow, or are they only interested in the harvest? Because the axe is clever. It always has been. But the forest, when it finally wakes up, is vast, ancient, and full of quiet strength. The axe might be powerful, but the trees still outnumber it. They always have. And the truth is, the axe needs the forest to exist. The forest doesn't need the axe. When the trees remember that, even the sharpest blade doesn't stand a chance. And maybe that's the lesson of this whole thing. The axe is nothing without the forest. Thanks for watching. As always, take care of you, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.